All right, let's talk about the relationship between the different cost curves that we've drawn. So again, we're going to stick with the example of our baker, and we've talked a lot about the different kinds of costs and the relationship between them. Right? So fixed cost, average cost, total cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost, average total cost, marginal cost, all the relationships between them. Now we're going to just, you know how to graph them. Now we're going to graphically look at how they're related to each other when you're drawing a complete graph of all the cost curves on it. So a lot of these terminologies should have gone by our video screen when I was talking, so make sure you understand those before you continue. All right, so these are what all the curves look like. Let's go by one at a time. So your average total cost is U-shaped. Your average variable cost is U-shaped. You should know why. It's because of increasing marginal product of labor and then diminishing marginal product of labor. Your average fixed cost starts off high and it always declines. The point where these two intersect is meaningless. Right? That doesn't have any implication. And you get ATC by adding up these two lines, right? Average variable and average fixed cost. And then the marginal cost, which is also U-shaped, and don't worry about where I've drawn it here. We will talk about that. That's the whole point of this video, is where is this drawn in relation to the others. So that's an important part which students often get mixed up with. So that's what we're going to draw. That's what we're going to learn today. So let's look at the relationships between these different curves. So AFC helps us determine ATC. Right? ATC is AFC plus AVC. So we need to know where AFC is to be able to draw ATC. AFC has no effect on any other line. When you draw AFC, it's completely independent of AVC and MC, right? So it only affects ATC. AVC is going to affect ATC as well. So both AFC and AVC affect ATC, and as you'll see, AVC is going to have an effect on marginal cost as well. Average variable cost again has no effect on, average variable cost is going to have no effect on average fixed cost. And then again, it's good to remember a lot of the formulas. Average total cost equals average fixed cost plus average variable cost. All right, so now let's look at the relationship between marginal cost and where it is going to be drawn in relation to average variable and average total cost. Now before we go over this, let me give you an analogy, and I've used this analogy in another video in a different topic, but think about your average total cost or your average variable cost as your overall grade point average. So whatever grade point average you have over the last 2 years, or how many ever years you've been in school, your overall grade point average, let's say, is a B. So that's what you've gotten on average across 3 years. Marginal cost is the grade you're going to get in your next class. So in your next microeconomics class, if you do very well, let's say you get an A on your economics class, that means the overall grade point average is going to be pulled up. So if the grade you get in your next class is higher than your average is going to be increasing. Similarly, if your average is a B grade right now, and the grade in your next class is a D, your average is going to be pulled down. So if you understand that, apply that here. Whenever marginal cost is less than average cost, whether it's average total or average variable, your average total cost is going to be declining because the grade you get in your next class is less than your average grade. And then similarly, whenever average total cost is less than marginal cost, or the grade you get in your next class is more than your average is going to be increasing. So keeping that in mind, AFC is always downward sloping, AVC is U-shaped, ATC is U-shaped. Now MC, you're going to draw MC to be U-shaped, and then following these rules. If MC is below ATC, ATC has to be declining. If MC is above ATC, ATC has to be increasing, which means the U-shaped ATC, MC is going to cross that line at its minimum point. Right, so make sure you understand that analogy. So when you have your average total cost, marginal cost is going to cut across the ATC and AVC at their respective minimum points. And again, when I say minimum, I'm referring to where they are in terms of cost, right? Cost is on the vertical axis, quantities on the x-axis. So wherever they are minimum on the vertical axis is where MC is going to cross it. And then you just draw MC to be U-shaped. It doesn't matter whether it's increasing and decreasing before it crosses, that doesn't mean anything. And then it crosses it, and then as soon as MC goes above ATC, so at a point 6, MC is above ATC, therefore ATC is increasing. At 2, MC is below ATC, therefore ATC is declining. Right? So that's for all those quantities up till 4 point something, AVC or ATC is declining. And then for every quantity above that point, ATC is increasing. So that's important relationship where we draw. Whenever you're drawing these graphs, draw marginal cost at the very end, because you need to know where those minimum points are to be able to draw that. So first start with AFC and AVC. Those two are the first to draw. Then you draw ATC, and then finally you draw marginal cost. Right? So hopefully you're understanding what we're doing here, and you should be able to then graph them. Again, don't memorize this graph. You will never remember it on an exam if you try to memorize it. You will remember it if you understand each of them separately and then draw it one at a time on the exam. Right? That's the only way you're going to do well on your exam. So just to put everything together, your average variable cost, your average total cost, your average fixed cost, and your marginal cost. Your ATC is U-shaped, your AVC is U-shaped, your AFC is always going down, and then your marginal cost is going to be cutting across both the AVC and ATC at their respective minimum points. Again, where AFC cuts anything is irrelevant. AFC is only there because in the short run we have some fixed costs, and it's going to help us determine where ATC is. That's the only point of AFC. Well, other than the fact that you're going to incur some fixed costs when you're running your business as well. So make sure you're very clear on these relationships, know the definitions, know how to work with the numerical example, which I've done plenty of, and then now graph them and draw them correctly, because when we get to the next chapter, the next two chapters, we're going to be using this over and over again. We're going to be using this as a starting point and then drawing your profits regions. So make sure you're very clear on this before you get to the next chapter and the chapter after that. So three important properties, and then we'll conclude this video. Marginal cost and average variable cost must eventually always increase because of diminishing marginal product of labor, or the law of diminishing returns. So if a firm is experiencing increasing marginal product of labor, both MC and AVC will go down, and if they're not experiencing increasing marginal product of labor, then they don't have the downward sloping part. But the upward sloping part, they will always have. All right? ATC is always going to be U-shaped regardless of whether you have increasing or decreasing marginal product of labor. And then AFC, of course, is always going to be always downward sloping. And then lastly, MC should cut across both AVC and ATC at their respective minimums. So make sure you're very clear on these relationships before you proceed. And then you already know what the diminishing law of diminishing returns, the diminishing marginal product says, that eventually, in the short run, this is all still in the short run, we have not said that we can vary any input other than labor. Everything else is still kept fixed in terms of the inputs. That it becomes less, labor becomes less productive as you hire more labor because other inputs are kept fixed. Or when a company becomes very large, it's sometimes very hard for them to manage. And which is also why, if you look at the real world and you look at mergers, some companies buying other companies and becoming a larger company, sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. And often when they're not successful, it might be due to the fact that they became so large that it's much harder for them to manage a much larger company across different continents than it is to manage a smaller scale industry or a firm. So hopefully you now understand average variable costs, average fixed cost, average total cost, marginal cost, and the relationships between them. I've been saying this over and over again, and hopefully you've learned it as I've been teaching it. In the next video, we'll talk about some long run, and then we're going to conclude this chapter after that.